Justin Jefferson just broke the bank in Minnesota, and it is absolutely going to have ripple effects that reach Washington and affect the way they deal with receivers like Terry McLaurin, Jahan Dotson, and even potentially T. Higgins and Brandon Ayuk. That coming up on today's episode of Locked On Commanders.
You are Locked On Commanders, your daily podcast on the Washington Commanders. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome into today's episode of Locked On Commanders, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. This is your daily podcast covering the Washington Commanders, and you can subscribe for free on YouTube or wherever you're listening to podcasts. I'm your host, David Harrison, credentialed member of the media covering the Washington Commanders for CommanderGameDay.com, a part of Sports Illustrated, here with you every Monday through Friday. And I greatly appreciate you for coming through for today's episode. Everydayers, thanks for coming through on a regular basis like you do. On today's episode, the fallout of Washington releasing Brandon McManus and the post-June 1st free agency landscape. But first, we're going to start with a new contract that landed on the NFL landscape on Monday. Justin Jefferson, Minnesota Vikings wide receiver, signing a record-setting contract that is something that's got everybody's attention, and I promise you it has general manager Adam Peters' attention as well. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $150 with any winning $5 bet. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started today. If you want to discuss anything on this episode or anything outside of this episode, you can do so by becoming a Locked On Commanders insider. Go to joinsubtext.com/LockedOnCommanders. And from there, you can text me anything that your heart desires as a football fan. You'll get messages, content, analysis, news, opinions from me delivered directly to you. No hashtags, no apps, no filters. Just you text me, I text you. Again, joinsubtext.com/LockedOnCommanders to join the ever-growing group of insiders today. Justin Jefferson, wide receiver extraordinaire, star of the Minnesota Vikings. His extension with the Minnesota Vikings announced on Monday. It is a 4-year deal worth $140 million and $110 million guaranteed. It is the largest non-quarterback contract ever signed in the history of the National Football League. And with it, the phrase setting the market comes to mind, but also the truth is that Jefferson basically just filled the pool because, as JFK once said, quote, a rising tide lifts all boats, end quote. That is exactly what Justin Jefferson just did, not only for himself, but for all of his fellow wide receivers. And it's something that he will probably actually be able to benefit from in his next contract, because what this basically does is it creates even more inflation on top of an already inflating wide receiver salary structure, that when the top end of the market rises, just like it just did right now, the middle also rises. Only the floor stays the same. The floor, veteran minimum contracts, league minimum contracts, rookie contracts, that's the floor. The floor stays the same. Those things can only change with collective bargaining agreement situations, not with player negotiations, not with agent negotiations. But the middle pool and the upper pool, all of that changes. For example, Jamar Chase, the Cincinnati Bengals, expected to pursue or be maybe that next big time wide receiver that gets a new contract. He's expected to want even more money than Justin Jefferson. So Justin Jefferson's record-setting contract may not be a record-setting contract for very much longer. And this is where Justin's contract impacts Washington, because there is a world, and I'm not saying it's going to happen, I'm not wishing it to happen, I'm not even necessarily hard predicting that it's going to happen, but there is a world, ladies and gentlemen, where Terry McLaurin and Jahan Dotson, Washington Commanders wide receivers, could be entering 2025 on expiring contracts, both of them. Now, Terry McLaurin, outside of an extension that gets done this offseason, not likely, or next offseason, and still, I would still lean not likely, not as much as not likely as it is this offseason, but certainly I would still put in the realm of not likely. Terry McLaurin will be on an expiring contract. His extension that he signed under the Ron Rivera group is set to expire after the 2025 NFL season. And if Jahan Dotson's 5th-year option is not picked up this coming offseason, or not this coming offseason, but next offseason, then his contract will also expire in 2025, which means that if that scenario unfolds in 2026, projected, your most experienced receiver could be Luke McCaffrey. And I like Luke. I like what we've seen from him so far, but I am not ready in June of 2024 to say he should be the most experienced receiver in this room in June of 2026. Not that that's going to happen, but just to kind of frame everything we're talking about here, because at the end of the day, if Washington was forced to keep only either Terry McLaurin or Jahan Dotson, I think most Commanders fans would say they want them to keep Terry McLaurin. In fact, I asked my insiders that question, and most of them, I'd say about 80% of them did say Terry McLaurin. Now, there were some conversations had with some insiders about the age of Jahan Dotson versus Terry McLaurin and all this stuff. And of course, this upcoming season is going to have a big impact on how everybody feels about that. Bottom line is, if Jahan Dotson's production this year is what it was last year, I don't foresee his fifth-year option being picked up. But knock on wood, everything goes well. Everything goes great. Terry McLaurin, Jahan Dotson, both 1,000-yard receivers, both 10-plus touchdowns. And you might have a different problem if you're Washington as far as who you're going to pay than what we're talking about right now. But if we go number for number here, we talk about Terry McLaurin because he's the most established, most veteran, most consistent receiver on this roster by a long shot. It's not even close. When you look at Justin Jefferson's career numbers per game, 6.5 catches per game, 0.5 touchdowns per game, 98.3 yards 98.3 yards receptions in receiving per game. And you compare that to Terry McLaurin. McLaurin is basically producing at about 66% of the rates that Justin Jefferson is. So Justin Jefferson, best wide receiver in the National Football League in a lot of conversations. He's at least in the conversation, even if you think someone else is better, like a Jamar Chase, for example. Justin Jefferson is at least in that conversation. Terry McLaurin is producing at about a 66% clip compared to Justin Jefferson. So if you just take the hard numbers, a Terry McLaurin extension, thanks to this Justin Jefferson inflation, would look like 4 years, $92.4 million, $72.6 million guaranteed, $23.1 million average annual salary. And that is before Terry McLaurin's agents try to come through and say, yeah, but look at the lack of quarterback, look at the lack of consistent OC, look at the lack of consistent head coaching ability that my client has been dealing with. You owe him a little bit of money for that hardship and that suffering. And certainly some people would agree with him. And then the team's going to come back and say, yeah, but you're going to be over 30 by the time this contract expires, all this other stuff, right? So there's a lot of finagling in here. But if you just look at the hard, here's what Justin Jefferson just got, here's the percentage of Jefferson's production that McLaurin is putting down and what that looks like financially, that's what you're talking about. It's about 4 years, close to $100 million, close to $75 million guaranteed. Do you want to pay that to Terry McLaurin as you see it right now? And again, we don't know what June 2024 or June 2025 is going to look like, but standing in June 2024, that would be a 13th overall contract according to compared to receivers in today's NFL, just behind guys like Michael Pittman Jr., young with a lot of time left, Deebo Samuel, certainly more dynamic, DK Metcalf. He's got the size and he's got the length. Nico Collins certainly had a breakout year last year. That's just what the math says. So again, if today Washington tries to re-sign McLaurin ahead of 2025 before that contract year is over, the inflation could rise to even $25 million per year. That's number 8 compared to today's market, especially after Jamar Chase cashes in the Cincinnati Bengals. Because like I said, he's going to want even more. So actually, this Justin Jefferson deal is going to be second most at that point in time. Jamar Chase is going to have the highest non-quarterback contract in NFL history. And there will be 6 NFL wide receivers at that point minimum. And that's for anything else possibly gets done, making over $30 million a year. Here's why this is important. And that's on average contract. That's not necessarily raw numbers, but here's why this is important. So you've got about 5 or 6 receivers here in the next, 365 days or so who are going to be earning more than $30 million annual average value on their contracts. 5 years ago, none were making even 20. That is how quickly this wide receiver market contract situation has inflated. This is called a regime shift. When you talk about ecosystems, this is called a regime shift. Sudden, deliberate, very, very, very heart-altering events that happen in an ecosystem. 5 years, the wide receiver, the top money in the wide receiver group for the NFL has inflated over $10 million in just 5 years. That money, that inflation is going to impact the mid-level receivers, going to impact, obviously, the top-level receivers, and it's going to impact how teams decide to deal with them. You look at the future, free agents like guys like T. Higgins from the Cincinnati Bengals. He believes he's a number 1 receiver. Right now, his production is about 71% of Justin Jefferson's. His agents, his people are going to say, yeah, but it's because of Jamar Chase. Are you going to pay T. Higgins? Because if you do, again, what you're going to pay him is going to fall in line with that inflation schedule. But there's also door number 3 where you just go to the draft. And I think you're going to start seeing some teams that maybe don't necessarily pay their really good number 2 receivers to be a number 1 versus going to the draft and trying to get like 5 number 2 quality caliber wide receivers, rotate them in and out, and basically take your chances on finding another one. So it's really interesting because as this shift continues to happen in the ecosystem of wide receivers, I think you're going to see teams approach their wide receiver contracts much differently. The higher they go, the more prohibitive it's going to become for teams to actually do that. Very interesting. Congratulations to Justin Jefferson, of course. Very interesting to see his contract get done. Very happy for him. He shared a nice emotional video. If you haven't seen it, you can check it out on his social media. But believe me, even though it's the NFC North, it's the Minnesota Vikings, Commanders don't play them, trust me, this Justin Jefferson contract has effects. It has an impact on what the Washington Commanders are going to do here in the next couple of years. And so will Jamar Chase, so on and so forth, because there are some other big contracts expiring. Coming up next, there's 3 position groups that specifically Commanders fans seem to want additions to in free agency: wide receiver, cornerback, and offensive tackle. I'm going to tell you what the post-June 1st free agent landscape looks like and see if there's any worthy candidates that the Commanders could or should at least consider bringing in before July's training camp. That's next on today's episode of Locked On Commanders, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And today's episode of Locked On Commanders brought to you by Game Time. Game Time makes getting NBA Finals tickets even faster and easier because prices on the Game Time app actually go down the closer it gets to tip-off. They've got killer last-minute deals that save you up to 60% on tickets, all-in prices, so there's no surprises when you get to the checkout menu. Views from your seat so you can see the venue, even if you've never been in the venue, and their lowest price guarantee. You find tickets to the same event in the same row for less, they will give you 110% of that value. Game Time literally takes the work out of you buying NBA tickets or even NHL tickets. Right now, you can get NBA Finals tickets for as little as $582 a ticket. Stanley Cup Finals going on in Florida. Florida Panthers are going to host, again, all that at Game Time. So download the Game Time app, create your account, use the code LOCKEDONNFL to get $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Create your account, redeem the code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. Thanks again for making Locked On Commanders your first listen, your first view today and every day. Everydayers, thanks for coming through on a regular basis like you do. Also, make sure you're checking out Locked On Sports Today, a free 24/7 sports streaming channel program for you every day to bring you the biggest news stories in sports. Locked On Sports Today brings you can't miss analysis, opinions, news, and everything else, streaming 24/7 on YouTube or the free Amazon Fire TV channels app, all part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. We are moving now into the post-June 1st free agent landscape. We're recording this on June 3rd, so obviously it is after June 1st. Still, teams can cut players, and certainly players can become available, but usually your post-June 1st cuts are all made by now, and usually by now, everybody kind of knows what their roster is going to look like. Obviously, Washington's got a kicker situation that we're going to talk about here in just a little bit, but when you look around the landscape, there are a few position groups that fans have wanted to see the Commanders address really all offseason long into the NFL draft, and some are still not happy with how much they did address them, right? Talking about wide receiver, obviously the team brought in some veterans, Olamide Zaccheaus, for example, Damiere Byrd, for example. They also drafted Luke McCaffrey, but still there are fans out there and media members out there who want to see the Commanders do even more. Offensive tackle, they drafted Brandon Coleman. He brought in some new free agents, but there is still fans and media who want to see the Commanders do more. And then cornerback as well, even with guys like Michael Davis coming in, they want to see the team do more. So I thought we would take a look at the post-June 1st free agent landscape and kind of talk about some candidates in those position groups, starting at wide receiver. And wide receiver, really the only one that kind of looks like he might fit what people want for the Washington Commanders. And again, what you want for the Washington Commanders may be a little bit different. That's fine. But for the majority that we're seeing out there, the loud majority or the loud minority potentially, they want a taller guy. They want a taller guy who can be physical, good route runner, all that kind of stuff. And really, Michael Thomas, former New Orleans Saints receiver, is that guy. Now, the thing about Michael Thomas, he's 6'3", at least that's what he's listed at, 212 pounds, certainly known for his route running when he's healthy, all those things. Second round pick in the 2016 NFL draft by the Saints coming out of Ohio State. He is Keyshawn Johnson's nephew, which may not surprise you to learn after some of the personality things that Michael Thomas has shown over the course of his career. And honestly, I think that is part of the reason that the Washington Commanders probably not too interested in signing Michael Thomas. He's kind of got a reputation for being a little bit of a me-first type of player, not so much concerned about the success of the team as much as he is concerned about how he impacts the success of the team, if that makes sense. I'm not saying he'd rather have all of his numbers and losses, but he'd rather the team win because he got all of his numbers. So that's basically the best way that I can put it there. The other problem with Michael Thomas is his limited availability here in recent years. 2020, he only played in 7 games due to injury, missed all of 2021. 2022 only played in 3 games. 2023 did play in 10, started 7 of them, did come down 39 catches, 448 yards receiving, only 1 touchdown. Looked fairly good when he was healthy. The New Orleans Saints were kind of a mess all around, but he did start his career with 4 straight 1,000-yard seasons. And of course, the one that everybody remembers is 2019, 149 catches, 1,725 yards, and 9 touchdowns. That's the Michael Thomas you would love to bring into the organization. The question is that the Michael Thomas that you're going to get? Outside of him, most of your remaining free agent receivers are shorter guys, quicker, short area burst type of guys that most fans, most media aren't necessarily looking for the Washington Commanders to add to that group. Now we look to the offensive tackle position, and you've got names out there like DJ Humphries, a former Arizona Cardinal, David Bakhtiari, former Green Bay Packer, Donovan Smith, former Kansas City Chief, and DJ Humphries going to turn 31 years old in December. Problem with him is he's coming off of an ACL injury. So this is a guy who's probably going to be on the market for a little bit. There's some thought and some discussion that he can probably return just before halfway through the regular season. So if your team like Washington, you need to have early success, right? You need to have early success to build off, especially with a young quarterback. I think that's why DJ Humphries doesn't necessarily make a whole lot of sense. David Bakhtiari is somebody that when he was released by the Green Bay Packers, made it fairly clear that he's still definitely interested in playing. He's 32 years old. He turns 33 in September. So basically, he's going to be 33 for the 2024 NFL season. I think this is a move the Washington Commanders really only make if they don't believe that Brandon Coleman is ready to be a starting left tackle, and they don't believe that Cornelius Lucas is actually good enough to hold down that position until Brandon Coleman is ready to take on that spot. Or, we go into 2025 and they got to get a whole new left tackle. We'll see how that goes. Then you have Donovan Smith, who, again, an older guy, right? 31 years old. He turns 31 years old this month, so he'll be 31 years old entering training camp. He's a 2-time Super Bowl champion. Won a Super Bowl with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, won a Super Bowl with the Kansas City Chiefs. He's helped protect Tom Brady. He's helped protect Patrick Mahomes. I covered him for a lot of his career. I can tell you right now, Donovan runs hot and he runs cold. You talk about Charles Leno, it's a little bit similar. When Donovan is on, he's a very solid left tackle. When he misses bad, and he misses in ways that people like to clip and cut and share on social media. So it's kind of like a younger, maybe even healthier Charles Leno Jr. So again, to me, if he comes in, it's because the team basically acknowledges Brandon Coleman's not ready and he's not close to being ready. And Cornelius Lucas is not ready to be our starting left tackle. So right now, I don't see any of these moves being made before, say, training camp, barring any injuries. Knock on wood, that doesn't happen. Or if the team is just very well at hiding the fact that they don't think these guys are getting ready, because not a lot they can really show as a unit right now on the offensive line. Looking at cornerbacks, I think the most likely candidate to see the Commanders add, if they do in this post-June 1st free agent scene, would be Stephon Gilmore. Former Dallas Cowboys cornerback, was very good, very solid, very good for Dan Quinn's defense in Dallas. Not just last year, just last year in 2023. But he is also very long in the tooth, 33 years old, turns 34 in September. So again, basically he's going to play 2024 as a 34-year-old. Look, he's a solid player. He's a good veteran, all of those things. But is he really going to be better than what Benjamin St. Juste brings? Is he really going to be better than what Michael Davis brings? I don't know how much of an upgrade you're looking at there. And to a certain extent, you just kind of clog the cornerback room. I think this cornerback room is pretty much set with what they have, and it's just going to be a fact-finding mission in 2024. Let's get the best guys out there on the field, figure out where we are with that position. If we need to address it, we can address it in coming into 2025. Benjamin St. Juste contract is expiring. They've got 1-year contracts all over the roster, all of those things. A couple other players that were kind of interesting to me, just talking about it. Safety Justin Simmons, former Denver Bronco. Quandre Diggs from the Seattle Seahawks. Jamal Adams, also the Seattle Seahawks ties. And the thing about the Seahawks ties that's interesting to me is a lot of times you see coaches come in, they kind of pull back to their history and bring players with them, right? Bobby Wagner is an obvious example of that. But we've also heard Dan Quinn talk about a lot this offseason how this isn't going to be a copy-paste, a carbon copy of what he's done before. And you see they also bring in players. They brought some Dallas Cowboys in. They also bring in players like 2 defenders from the Carolina Panthers where, there's not that Dan Quinn or Joe Witt Jr. direct impact and connection. So I don't know that this staff necessarily wants to go heavy, bring in another Seattle Seahawk, and now you kind of start to get like the Washington Commander Hawks or whatever people would call it then. So I don't think they go – honestly, I don't think this team is adding free agents in any of these groups, but because people still want him, those are kind of the best candidates from all of these groups entering the post-June 1st free agent scene. Where they are going to add a free agent pretty soon is the kicker position. Brandon McManus release fallout coming up next on today's episode of Locked On Commanders, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And today's episode of Locked On Commanders brought to you by FanDuel. It is winner take all time in the NBA and the NHL, and FanDuel is giving you a shot to bring home a big win all of your own. Right now, new customers, you can get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $150 to bet on spreads, money lines, player props, and more. I like stacking my props and making my own same game parlays and all that stuff. It's kind of dangerous, but it's a lot of fun. So that's where I would spend that $150 in bonus bets if I were to have that. Right now, the Dallas Mavericks are getting ready to face the Boston Celtics Thursday night in Game 1 of the NBA Finals. The Celtics are favored to win that game. They're also favored to win the entire series. Meanwhile, in the NHL, the Edmonton Oilers are headed to the Stanley Cup Finals to face the Florida Panthers, and they are 1.5-goal underdogs in Game 1 in Florida against those Panthers as the Stanley Cup Finals get started. So bet on any of that action or anything else you're looking for at FanDuel.com/lockedon and make every playoff shot count. FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Wrapping up today's episode of Locked On Commanders, talking about the fallout from the Brandon McManus release. And first and foremost, we talked about this when the allegations first came out. It had to happen. At the end of the day, the Washington Commanders did not really have a decision. They had to have it. They had to make this decision. Probably had some conversations. McManus put out a statement through his agent that thanked the Commanders for the opportunity and all that other stuff. Definitely took the high road and didn't try to come out and say I'm being punished for something I didn't do. Look, I've heard the conversation. I've seen it on social media about people saying, whatever happened to innocent until proven guilty. What I will tell you about that is innocent until proven guilty only exists in the court of law. This is not a court of law. The Washington Commanders are not a court. They do not have to abide by that. They, in fact, should not abide by that. The Washington Commanders have a history here that everybody's got to talk about. And before you say that has nothing to do with this history, I understand that. But I've also seen many, many people already talk about, the Washington Commanders just can't get away from drama. So yes, it does have to do with the history because it's absolutely connected to the reputation of this organization. And what you can't do, I had this conversation with somebody the other day, what you can't do is you can't pay a man millions of dollars and then find out that he is liable or guilty of something as egregious as sexual assault. You just can't do it in today's market, in today's environment, especially when you are a team that has this bad of a reputation. So the Brandon McManus cut had to happen. Look, if he gets exonerated and all this other stuff and the Commanders had to bring him back, great, fantastic. I'm all for it. But this move is the move that had to happen in the forefront of that. So now they turn their eyes to finding a free agent kicker. I was asked by Adam Epstein on the radio on Monday afternoon when I expected the Commanders to sign a new kicker. And honestly, I think just like everybody else, I expect a new kicker to be signed before Wednesday's open practice, right? We have open practice with the Commanders on Wednesday, OTA practice. The players are back in town. Now they're having a practice on Tuesday. So why does the practice on Wednesday matter more than the practice on Tuesday? Well, because if there's no kicker out there for us to see on Wednesday, it's going to become a little bit more of a talked about situation. However, here's the thing about it. Right now, if you're practicing kickoffs, there's no tackling. There's no real pursuit. There's no hitting. So your kicker is not a part of the defensive equation, right? You can install your defense with the rest of your players without a kicker. If you're talking about field goals, there's no actual field goal blocking from a defensive or offensive standpoint. So again, you can go out there and you can put your guys in place. You can talk about strategies. You can talk about how we block down, how we do this, how we stunt, how we twist during our field goal rushes without a kicker in place. Now, the real reason you want a kicker in place as early as possible is because of the process. You got a long snapper, a holder, a kicker. Everybody needs to be on the same page so that everybody's comfortable with that process. But if we're being honest with you, that process doesn't have to start in June. Like, you can start that process in July if you really need to, and it might take a little bit of time, but you'll be okay. So do the Washington Commanders have to? I'm kind of preemptively talking about this. If they don't have a kicker Wednesday, is it a problem? I'm going to tell you no. I don't know if everybody's going to agree. I'm going to tell you no. Now, I would like to see them have a kicker in place for their mini camp, their mandatory mini camp beginning on June 11th. But again, even that, if a kicker gets signed later in the offseason between the mini camp and training camp, certainly Tress Way, all the members of the special teams doing the field goal unit can get together and do some extra work if they decide to. If not, you just give them some extra field time on the side to work on their snaps, work on all that stuff. I'm not too concerned about it. Some names out there to watch. Jake Bates out of the UFL. Obviously, he's a real popular one. I know he's kind of fallen off here a little bit, and there's some concerns that he can't actually kick outside of a dome environment, which the Commanders obviously don't have a home dome environment, so that's a problem. Mason Crosby is the veteran that I would keep an eye on, and Zane Gonzalez, a little bit younger. He's had some injury history, but when he's healthy, he has been pretty accurate. So those are the three names I would keep an eye on to replace Brandon McManus. Coming up tomorrow, we've got a mailbag episode of Locked On Commanders, and I will be at practice on Wednesday. So if you've got questions, drop them in the YouTube comment section. Insiders, text me directly. Become an insider by going to joinsubtext.com/Locked On Commanders. Don't forget to also check out Locked On Sports Today, the first ever 24/7 live streaming sports channel on YouTube. And as always, thank you for making Locked On Commanders your first listen of the day every day. Everydayers, thanks for coming through like you do. Until we speak again, if you're out and about, please be safe, be kind, and I'll see you next time for another episode of Locked On Commanders, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.